So those forces, like, you see how Josh Shapiro is cited in their book. And as soon as it comes out, he's immediately like, I'm all aboard the abundance agenda. That's what the fight's going to be in 2028. It's going to be about people who acknowledge that concentration of wealth is the main driver in the immiseration of the public, and people who want to ignore that fact. And you can't tell me that the millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that are being poured into the abundance agenda.
Are you hoping that Bernie and AOC get on board and endorse Zohran Mamdani?
Oh,
and
gosh,
also, do you think that he
course.
has a real chance?
The vanguard will be there, sir.
I definitely would be interested in talking a little bit more about the Democratic failures. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is having a real renaissance, right? I think for all of us, Gavin and I were talking about this, I would imagine it's the same for you, Emma. The most exciting moments in our life were during that peak Bernie Sanders era, when it was like, oh my gosh, we actually have something to believe in. There's hope. I mean, I feel delusional almost in hindsight, like it was totally naive, but I remember the New Hampshire primary, like in my gut being like, wow, we're about to, like 2020, like the change is happening, like holy shit. The revolution is here. Like people are going to, live differently now. We're going to save the earth, all this kind of crap.
Right.
Obviously, it didn't pan out like that. And then, through the Biden era, I was, let's just say, a little disappointed with the tone that Bernie Sanders took. I thought that he was the number one Biden bro. I thought that he definitely, obviously, took way too long to come out and call for a ceasefire. I was very disappointed in a lot of the positioning that him and AOC, frankly, took during that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just as disappointed as I was during those 4 years, I've been equally excited about and encouraged by the fact that they have really taken it upon themselves to be like, fuck, nobody else in the Democratic Party is actually going to do anything about this. They are going to lose in perpetuity to a fascist white nationalist party that is going to drive us further and further and further towards, cataclysm, basically. It's going to be no good. How are you feeling about all of that? Do you think that Bernie Sanders still has more in the tank? Do you think that AOC is his natural heir? How do you think that will all play out over the course of the midterms and general election as the Democrats desperately try and rebrand?
I mean, predictions are not my strong suit. I'm figuring out after thinking Kamala Harris is going to win the election.
No, you were just participating in our elaborate ruse over here. It was a big joke.
Good point.
Performance art.
Exactly. I'm going to go with that going forward. Just like, I don't necessarily. It's hard to say where the party's going to go, because I've thought in both Bernie Sanders campaigns, just what the common sense was. It was obvious who was the candidate who was generating the most enthusiasm, who would transform the Democratic base, who would bring in a working class coalition that would be so durable that the Democrats could actually build on the rhetoric that Bernie espoused in the primary. But the interests of capital won out in the Democratic Party. And we're seeing an attempt to reify those institutions via this abundance thing that we've been talking about all the time, right? Like the idea that it's deregulation that we should be emphasizing over capitalism, over income and wealth inequality. That's the burgeoning fight that we're seeing. And you even hear Derek Thompson, the co-author of that book, who says this is a fight for like the future of liberalism or progressivism, essentially. And it's definitely liberalism. I wouldn't say it's progressive or leftist in any way. So those forces, like, you see how Josh Shapiro is cited in their book. And as soon as it comes out, he's immediately like, I'm all aboard the abundance agenda. That's what the fight's going to be in 2028. It's going to be about people who acknowledge that concentration of wealth is the main driver in the immiseration of the public, and people who want to ignore that fact. And you can't tell me that the millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that are being poured into the abundance agenda isn't because they are emphasizing a policy set that would not tax the wealthy, at least in terms of the conditions that it's espousing, or in terms of the policy sets that it's putting forward and emphasizing, right? So I guess
that's how Klein made his entire career, right? Because I don't know how long you've followed Ezra. Obviously, you guys probably have a friendly relationship with the show. I'm not going to bash him too hard, but back in the day when it was,
I don't know
Bernie
about
Sanders era-
anymore. I don't know.
Sure.
About
Yeah, I
anymore,
guess you guys just did have him. But, he was the, I support healthcare. Like, look at the Nordic models. When it was Barack Obama's era, Bernie Sanders comes along. Oh, that could never happen in America. Then he writes this bullshit book, Why We're Polarized, and doesn't talk at all about the oligarchy, doesn't talk at all about how campaign finance reform is a necessity, doesn't talk at all about how there's such a narrow parameter of discourse, right? It's his job to kind of come up with an excuse for why the Democrats lost. That's not actually why they lost.
100%. I mean, we always see that, right? And I pushed back in the aftermath of the election when people were saying we shouldn't focus on the racism and misogyny that Kamala Harris faced because it's distracting from the overarching economic pain that people are experiencing, and the fact that we are in like gilded age levels of income and wealth inequality. I mean, compared to the French Revolution, whatever you want to say, like we are at an untenable level where we need to be taxing billionaires out of existence. That's of course the number one story. But I didn't think that the racism and misogyny was just an excuse. Like I felt like Hillary Clinton shielded herself with the cudgel of sexism much more than Kamala Harris did. But the underlying problem is that the party chose to go down the road of what Chuck Schumer was talking about, right? And then by extension, Ezra Klein, which is this appeal to affluent suburbanites, and that crosses ideological spectrums from, although honestly, it's kind of the same when you get down to brass tacks. And the focus on the disaffected Republican or on people who are homeowners, essentially an upper middle class focus. And that bore out in the end result, which showed that the Democrats lost the lower income bracket for the first time since the 1950s. And so, I think the obvious response to that should be, well, why is that the case? Given the fact that Lena Khan was quite aggressive in the administration on antitrust, given the fact that the Republicans, we see what they want to do. They want to harm the working class and put tax cuts on their back in this current budget proposal. But it does have to do with, I think, big money in politics and the willingness to address that, because since Citizens United, income inequality has exploded. And we've also seen an influx of money into our politics. And why is that the case? And the people who are willing to acknowledge that, the people who are willing to take that on, because for politicians, it is a real risk. Like, we are pundits, but we're not going to lose our job if we, don't endorse like this, but because we're independent, this kind of moneyed interest, right? I just saw John Ossoff voted for that horrible crypto bill, which is because he's afraid of being Sherrod Browned. He's terrified of being Sherrod Brown.
I mean, he is in a very vulnerable spot.
Yes.
But not to justify that at all. Same with the Laken Riley vote.
Right.
Same with all that crap. Yeah, it's disgraceful.
Right. So my point is just like that. It's a real thing, but you have to have the coalition and the bravery to take that on. And I guess that kind of brings us back full circle to AOC and Bernie, which is they can transcend that in the way that Trump can. And I mean, Trump has so much money backing him, but I don't think it's the money that wins him over in terms of elections. It's the fact that he's always in the news, the fact that he represents as a rich guy who can maybe solve your problems, the fact that he has this kind of unique charisma. You could say the same stuff about Bernie, not the wealthy stuff, but my point is just that, like, in this corroded media environment, we need a presidential candidate who can transcend that, who can rise above it, go viral, speak to people where they are. I think it's a different conversation with the structure of the Democratic Party and senators and Congress people. It really is like much more of a celebrity contest than I think a lot of more mainstream Democrats are willing to admit. And then because the right has so much money on its side, what the left needs to do is to make sure it's a people-powered working class movement. And the only person I see who can carry that mantle forward, back to your original question, Zach, is AOC. I don't think Bernie's going to run again. I think he understands the dude's in his 80s. Like it would be very tough for him to kind of take that job on. I think people underestimate AOC. I'm a huge fan of hers in the sense that, like, I guess I was a fan of the fact that Elizabeth Warren could make friends within the party to get certain things done, and that Bernie Sanders was the outside person who could bring into a working class coalition. And if there was somebody who could meld those politics, I think it could be a really formidable candidate. And I really think she could be that person, given how she's won over her colleagues in the House and given how she's taken on the mantle from Bernie Sanders. My mother's generation, right? Hillary Clinton is this feminist icon for almost all of her friends, right? I think for average Democrats under 40, AOC is kind of that person. Like, even my friends who don't share her politics, they love her. They look up to her, right? My girlfriends. And that's such a high floor for a candidate in a primary that's being very much discounted just by name recognition alone. So I think she's being underestimated if she chooses to run for president.
Yeah, I really hope she's able to continue rising to the occasion, because I agree, despite my criticisms of her in the past, I do think we can point to areas where she has kind of risen to the occasion. I do still have my skepticisms, though, Emma. And to be honest, I'm really interested in your opinion on this, because you're obviously in New York City. You probably have a little bit more insight into the mayoral campaign of Zohran Mamdani, who's, of course, running to unseat Eric Adams, and also obviously running against Andrew Cuomo, who's the real threat. Are you hoping that Bernie and AOC get on board and endorse Zohran Mamdani? And also, do you think that he has a real chance? Because, we talk about the mood of, progressive, like the Democratic Party is finally entering a more progressive mindset. They're finally ready to stand up to the establishment leaders of their own party and say enough is enough, or, ready for a real populist progressive agenda. But I am worried that, if you look at what happens in New York City, despite how impressed I am by Zohran, I'm still worried that Cuomo pulls it out. And it's like, are we just going to be trapped in this fucking, system forever, where even though there's a clear alternative right there who's running a people power campaign, he raised so many donations from the grassroots that he had to stop accepting money, which is fucking crazy this early into an election. Like, I've never even heard of that happening. But either way, I'm still worried that the establishment is strong enough, that the big money connections are strong enough that freaking Andrew Cuomo is going to be your guys' mayor again. So what's your thoughts on that? And do you think that a Bernie or AOC endorsement would put Zohran over the top?
Definitely. I'm disappointed that it hasn't happened yet. I'm holding out hope that it's going to happen. We have a little over a month until the primary. But I saw this tweet earlier from a reporter at Esquire, just pointing out what the numbers were in the 2021 mayoral primary here in New York. Only 1 million of 3.8 million eligible New Yorkers, meaning you have to be a registered Democrat to vote in the primary, voted in the 2020 mayoral primary. So, I mean, that is you need to turn out the rest of those people, basically. That's 1 million out of 3.8 million eligible New Yorkers in 2021. And I think Zohran Mamdani has and his campaign have knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors. They're trying to get out the vote, and that is their path to victory. And what's encouraging about that is that that was AOC's path to victory, right? And I covered that campaign when I was with TYT pretty closely. I spent the day with her. I went to her apartment. We toured around her potential future district. And I got a bit of insight into her campaign strategy, which was basically turning out non-traditional voters in a primary where there's typically low turnout to take down an establishment Democrat who had the institutional backing of moneyed interests in the city. And Andrew Cuomo is that guy, but he has more name recognition, obviously, given his father, and
but also more scandals.
But also more scandals, exactly right. And so that's I don't know how one-to-one that's going to be, but I think he's being underestimated in polling. I'll say that right now, Zohran.
Do you know if there's going to be like a debate between the two at some point or something? Because I feel like that could also.
I don't know.
Oh, because there was a debate between what was his name, Skinner, and Brad Lander and Zohran, and Cuomo refused to.
Cuomo didn't show.
But eventually, if they're the top two, like, they will have to face off at some point.
I don't think Cuomo will want to. I think Cuomo is entirely relying on low turnout and name recognition and the endorsement of both business interests, but also even like more conservative Black leaders, right? And older Black leaders. That's what he's hoping to ride. And this is a problem broadly with the Democratic Party, where often the Black vote is spoken about as this monolith, and you'll see this on the national level too, with like Clyburn and Biden's relationship, for example, where the most conservative Black voices, because they are often a part of institutions like churches or traditionally Democratic associated activist groups, those endorsements will be uplifted and they will be conflated with Black enthusiasm for more conservative Democratic candidates, when in fact there's a lot of diversity among Black Democratic voters, and it's mostly, like it is with everything, about age. The older you are, if you're more likely to be a conservative Black voter, and there are also voters who are higher turnout who are going to show up in the primary regardless. So that's what Cuomo is banking on: older, more conservative Democratic primary voters. But I don't know if it can overcome what Zohran is doing here. This is the most excited I've been about a campaign since AOC. And I used to say that about Jamal Bowman because I thought he was a phenomenal candidate. But he did some things as with, it's not really his fault. It's AIPAC. But I think Zohran, my point is being not to criticize Jamal Bowman gratuitously, who's a great guy, is that I think Zohran could be a transformational candidate. And I don't really see many missteps with his campaign.
Zohran is so real, Emma, that when Gavin and I had 250 fucking subscribers on our show, this guy comes on and chats with us. We watched him do the taxi medallion hunger strikes. We watched him protest for Palestine like a motherfucker. We watched him get in the face of people, protesting against deportations from ICE. I mean, this guy is locked the fuck in. You know what I mean? He is a man of the people. So I love what you're saying. I hope that the polling is underrated for sure.
And I wanted to also, I didn't mention this, but it's important to mention that Cuomo is also trying to galvanize more, Hasidic Jewish communities, more conservative Jewish communities in this city where, like I live kind of close to Williamsburg, sort of in that area. There's a significant community that he's courting, or in Crown Heights, who he feels are going to vote on the issue of Israel. And that's why you see these disgusting lie hit pieces in Politico or the New York Post about how Zohran is some anti-Semite. That's not the case, but it's racially charged. They're using his background to basically conflate that with being a terrorist or Hamas, and they use terms like anti-Semite when we all know what they're actually saying.
I can't believe they're using that playbook against him. I never would have guessed that would be their move.
What a shock, yeah.
Look out the door if you hear an ambulance. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there. Be there. The Vanguard will be there. Be there.